Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and this is the first installment in my read-along of Oscar and Lucinda by Peter Carey. We're going to be talking about chapters 1 through 32 today. I probably know this novel better than I know any other work of literature. There are obviously films that I know better than this. We all have movies that we've seen dozens of times. There are people who have movies they've seen hundreds of times. But yeah, of all the novels that I've ever read, the poems that I've ever read, the plays that I've ever read, this is the text that I feel like I know the best. And you might think, right, that would allow me to just kind of fly through it because I know it so well. But I'm a sub-vocalizer. And it doesn't matter how well I know a text, particularly if the text is so beautifully written, is as beautifully written as this is. I want to savor all of the language. I want to savor the sentences. I want to savor the ideas, and so I don't fly through anything that I read, even if I've read it 7 times before. All right, so let's get into this a little bit. So I am fond of saying that there are 3 kinds of readers. There are readers who privilege plot above all else. There are readers who privilege character above all else. And then there are readers who privilege language above all else. And I am a language reader, by which I mean I notice alliteration and assonance and these kinds of things, these kind of poetic tools that novelists will sometimes bring to bear on their prose. And I think there are a lot of readers who don't even notice when that's happening, or they think that maybe that the novelist isn't conscious of it, right? But that's not the case with Oscar and Lucinda. There are even phrases in the book, constructions in the book that feel almost like palindromes, which is delightful. In short, I feel like Carey's attitude toward language is incredibly mischievous and playful, self-aware, and I for one just really appreciate that. He actually declares himself that kind of writer at one point on page 105 in my edition. So in this scene we have Lucinda, all right, one of the title characters. We have Chaz Ahern and his wife, Mrs. Ahern. And says here, her nose and cheeks felt far too prominent. She wished her hair released so it might stop her headache, so her features might be softened, but no, it was not allowed. She got instead the Garibaldi hat and Mr. Ahern's little joke. He pretended to be much amused by ladies' fashions, that it looked like a pimple on a pumpkin. Lucinda, imagining the expression referred to her red cheeks, was mortified. But Mr. Ahern had liked the expression for its sound, not its verisimilitude. The hat was not too small, nor her cheeks too red. Right? He liked the expression for its sound. Right? It looked like a pimple on a pumpkin. And throughout the book, right? Even in these first 100 pages, we have so many instances of Carey giving us phrases and expressions precisely like that, right? That bring alliteration into the game, that bring assonance into the game, and he's doing it because he likes it for the sound, right? The music that it makes in our eyes as we're reading. Some examples of this kind of thing in the book here on page 82. Sweet white broken wood glistened in the sunlight. The axes stopped. They stared at her, a girl in emerald green bloomers carrying a suitcase through the wet winter gray grass, right? The wet winter gray grass. There's just something so beautiful about that. Let's see, on page 35. My pages here. Yeah, and this here is probably my favorite paragraph in the book, actually. It actually starts down on page 34. He looked down watching his brown spit and polished boots, the red gravel, the dead margins of the path. He thought of summer, of hawthorn white with blossom, the sloe, the maple, the guelder rose with its snowballs, the glossy heart-shaped leaves of bryony. He was hurt and aching for bright evenings. He saw the gentle inquiring motion of his papa's malacca cane as it blessed the pretty dog violet, stitchwort with its 1,000 white stars, dog mercury, rose campion. He thought, I will never be happy again. And as far as the musicality goes in there, right? So we have a sentence that ends, the glossy heart-shaped leaves of bryony. That word bryony. The very next sentence, he was hurt and aching for bright evenings. Bright evenings and bryony have almost exactly the same sound. He saw the gentle inquiring motion of his papa's malacca cane, right? That phrase, his papa's malacca cane. Papa malacca cane. Malacca cane, right? There's just something so wonderful about how those three words just bleed into each other, right? His papa's malacca cane. So other examples here, page 12, early on in the book. Again, one of my favorite sentences in the book. Christmas Day, cooed Fanny Drabble, and they say the boilers are bursting from all the frost at Exeter. So Christmas Day, cooed Fanny Drabble, right? Christmas, we have Christmas and cooed, day and drabble, right? Just all right in there. Christmas Day, cooed Fanny Drabble, and they say the boilers are bursting, right? They say the boilers are bursting from all the frost. All and frost have that same A sound in there. From all the frost at Exeter. Frost at Exeter, right? So there's just something really punchy and lovely about the way he uses words, and he knows he's doing it, right? And it's not just that passage about the pimple on the pumpkin, right? And how Chaz Ahern liked it for its sound. It's not just that moment that tells us that Carey's doing this on purpose, that he's aware of it. Let's see, one more example for you guys that I just love so much. Oscar sat like a stook of sticks, a lean-to of 2 long bones, right? He sat like a stook of sticks. And then a lean-to of 2 long bones. Lean-to is hyphenated. Too long is hyphenated. It's like lean-to and too long are looking at each other in the mirror. It's just wonderful, wonderful writing. So again, it's playful, it's mischievous, it's musical, which is interesting, right? Because the novel also is primarily made up of really, really clear declarative sentences, right? There are a lot of kind of wonderful winding Dickensian sentences as well. But you tend not to think of language that's musical in this way, kind of lending itself to really kind of short, snappy, declarative sentences. But it works. It really does work. This is a novel of observation, right? A novel of kind of pointillist cataloging of environments and appearances, of personalities. In this way, Carey is kind of the novelist equivalent of Theophilus Hopkins in the book, right? With his coastal ecosystems, careful, precise, measured examination of what he sees in the world around him. Carey in this way is like Oscar Hopkins as well, in the way that he orders and arranges and rearranges his mother's buttons. 560 buttons, I think it was. Yes, right? I mean, we're even given that precise number in the book. And since we're talking about Theophilus and Oscar Hopkins, I wanted to mention to you guys as well that Oscar and Lucinda works very much so as an homage to Edmund Goss's memoir, Father and Son. Okay, now Edmund Goss was the son, back in the 19th century, was the son of a naturalist named Philip Goss. And Philip Goss was most famous for a book that he wrote called Omphalos, which, from what I understand, reading about it online, was a book that was looking to somehow reconcile the age of the earth, right, as revealed by Charles Lyell, right, with his, I think his book was called Principles of Geology. was looking to reconcile that with creationism, right? With this idea that God created everything, in its finished form, I suppose is the best way to say it. Philip Goss was also, like Theophilus Hopkins, was a kind of preacher, and had a very intense religious zeal about him. And this memoir by Edmund Goss is the story of his childhood being raised by that man. And there are passages, I read this in grad school, there are passages in this book that actually have a page turned down. I wonder if this tells me. No, I have no idea why I turned that page down back in grad school. Anyway, there are one or two passages in this book that's where Carey, he almost kind of lifts the paragraphs themselves and kind of just drops them into Oscar and Lucinda. It was really fascinating reading this for the first time after having read Oscar and Lucinda so many times and being so familiar with it as I was, and just seeing just the really intense echoes in Oscar and Lucinda from father and son, and actually on page 21 in Oscar and Lucinda, we have an overt nod to Edmund Goss's book. The voice he heard may not have been what you would call God, but let it rest. You may have another word for all the things both Hopkins's, and in parentheses, father and son, called God. So he actually gets that phrase, father and son, into the book. So anyway, what else did I want to say? Do I want to say anything else here? One thing that the declarative sentences do, which I find really, really fascinating, is that, the narrator of Oscar and Lucinda, okay, is a descendant of Oscar Hopkins. Okay, we learned this on the very first page of the book. But he's telling this story, and some people on BookTube and some critics have commented in the past about how can the narrator possibly have known all of these things, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a greater maybe unreliability about the narrator than there is in many books, right? There's a greater sense of invention or fancy maybe on the part of the narrator. Gosh, sometimes I hate wearing glasses, but I just can't bear the idea of touching my eyeball, right? Put contact lenses in. But yeah, my glasses sometimes, man, they just don't. The fog on them, the mist on them, the smudges on them, it's strange. I never actually got smudges on my glasses when I was a kid growing up. That was my brother's domain. But anyway, so back to the narrator, right? So there's maybe a greater sense of unreliability or invention or fancy about the narrator. And I think one of the things that the declarative sentences do, because there's no ambiguity about them, and they seem to have just such confidence, and they're just layered onto each other. It's like one right after the other, right? Like I said before, it's a kind of cataloging in the book, and or inventorying, if we want to use the kind of Dubrow term, although this is definitely not a Dubrow book. But one of the things that the declarative sentences do is that they lend a kind of authority, I think, to the narrator's voice, right? So even though he might be unreliable, even though there might be some kind of invention or fancy about what he's doing, he seems so clear about it and so assertive about it that you buy it, that you believe it. And I think that's a really interesting way to kind of pull the rug out from under the idea of an unreliable narrator. So anyway, that's Oscar and Lucinda, right? The first 32 chapters of the book. Let me know what you guys think if you're reading along. I know Lukash is reading along. I know Nathan is reading along. Aaron Facer is reading along. I'm not sure about anybody else. Might just be the four of us. But definitely let me know what you think of the first quarter of the novel down below. I was telling Kelly before I came downstairs to film this morning that one of the things I love the most about Oscar and Lucinda is how clearly the characters of Oscar and Lucinda are drawn, right? I mean, talk about characters who leap off the page, and it's not even that he, again, right? Like, it's not even that he's summoned them or conjured them so much as that there's such an accretion of detail about how they look and how they act, and their psychologies, etc., that they feel like real people to me. And maybe it's partly just because I've read the novel so many times. I don't know, seen the film many times as well. But I can't imagine a world where these characters didn't exist somehow, right? They feel so real to me that I sometimes will imagine them in other Victorian novels, right? In true Victorian novels or other neo-Victorian novels, so something like Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. Right, there's a scene where Oscar and Worley Fish, right? They're in a carriage or a cab, I think, on their way to the track, and they pass a theater, and Oscar's never been, etc., etc. And in Tipping the Velvet, right, the two main characters work in a theater, and I sometimes like to imagine, the characters of Nan and Kitty in Tipping the Velvet, walking into the theater, and seeing this carriage pass with these two young would-be clergymen, one looking a little bit like a scarecrow with his red hair. I just can't imagine a world where these characters didn't exist, right? But they didn't before 1987 or 88, whenever this was published. They weren't in the world, and I don't know. I just marvel at that, right? I mean, I love the book. I admire the book, but it's one of the very few novels that I've read that I really marvel at. And Carey's creation of these two characters is just, God, it's such an achievement. It's such an achievement. So anyhow, I'll leave it there. And I will see you guys again next weekend for roughly the second quarter of the book. If you're curious about specifically what chapters we're reading for next weekend, I didn't jot it down, but it's in the description box beneath my announcement video for the read along, which I'll link to in the description box below this video. I hope you've had a really good weekend. If you're here in the States, you have tomorrow off, right? It's Columbus Day, also known as Indigenous Peoples Day. It's coming more commonly to be known as that. I hope you find some time to read tomorrow, or maybe watch a really great film, or just get out and enjoy the fall weather. So I will talk to you guys again very soon. Adios.